DAF, Pei, Gimel, Amud, Aleph. We were learning about yesterday about who you trust when the patient seems to be needing food on Yom Kippur. Do you trust the patient more or do you trust the doctors more? Rabbi Yaakov says you trust the patient more. Leiv yodei amaras nafsho, like the pasuk says, only the heart knows its own anguish, the anguish of its soul. And the Gemara had said, but the mashmos of the Mishnah was that you need bekiyin, you need medical experts to be able to tell you what the patient needs, and you don't listen to the patient. So the Gemara concludes, no, Rabbi Yaakov is correct. And the Mishnah was talking about a situation where the patient had said, I don't need anything, I'm fine. And that's where we have to consult with medical experts. Why two medical experts? So the Gemara had said, because that's in a situation when you have other medical experts who say that he doesn't need to eat. So when you have 2 against 2 medical experts, so then you go safek nefashos lahakel, and you go to the side of the medical experts who say that he does need, and you feed him. Now, we go on. We're on the second wide line of the Gemara. So, v'hamidikitani seifa, but take a look now at the second part of the Mishnah. V'im ein sham bekiyin ma'achilan oso al pi atzmo. That if there are no medical experts, only then do you rely on his own testimony, based on his own declaration. Michlal dereisha da amar tzarich. It sounds like from the second part of the Mishnah that the Reisha is also talking about where he says, I need. In other words, both cases are where he says, I need to eat. In the first part, you rely on only the medical experts. You listen to what they have to say. And only, says the Mishnah, when there are no medical experts available, then you can rely on him. So how can you tell me that the first part of the Mishnah was talking about where he said, I don't need? The Gemara says, Chisuri mechser avahachi kitani. You have to sort of insert a piece into this Mishnah as follows. When do we say that we rely on medical experts to feed him when he says, I don't need, because he's got this medical mishagas? But if he says, I need to eat, so then it depends. If there's only one doctor, one medical expert who says, nah, you're fine, and he says, no, I need, so then so then you feed him. And that's really what the Mishnah meant when it says that if ein sham bekiyin, if there are no 2 medical experts. In other words, the Gemara acknowledges that if it's 2 against 1, where the guy himself says, I don't need, so then you need 2, where he says, I need, then if you have 2 medical experts who say that he doesn't need, so then you listen to them. But if there are no 2 medical experts and there's only 1 medical expert, so then it's 1 against 1, so then you listen to the guy. But Marbar Avashi Omar, he disagrees, and he goes even further as far as patient autonomy. Right? He says, Kol heicha de Omar tzarachani, afilu ikameya de amilot tzarach lididei shaminot. That even if you have 100 medical experts who say, you're fine, you don't need to break your fast, but he says, I'm the patient, I know what's going on inside my body, and I need to eat, you still listen to the patient. Shenamar leiv yodei amoras nafsho. So Marbar Avashi takes that principle of leiv yodei amoras nafsho to the extreme. The previous opinion of the Gemara was saying, yes, it's true, leiv yodei amoras nafsho, but not in the face of 2 medical experts. But Marbar Avashi says, no, even in the face of 100 medical experts, we listen to the patient first. So now, according to that opinion, let's look at that line in the Mishnah. Imein sham bekiyin machilan oso al pi atzmo. That only if there are no medical experts do we allow him to eat. It's mashma time of the leka bekiyin ha'ika bekiyin lo. It sounds like if the medical experts contradict him, then we listen to the experts and we don't listen to him. Kashan Marbar Avashi. So the Gemara says hachi kamar. Bamed dvar mamurim da'amar lo tzarachani. When do we say that we listen to the medical experts? Is only when he says he doesn't need to eat. However, aval amar tzarachani, so if he says I need to eat, then ein sham bekiyin klal. So then there's no reckoning with experts. That's really what it means, ein bekiyin. If Ein Sham Bekiyin is not that there are no medical experts available, it means that we don't reckon with the medical experts. That's the way you have to read that line of the Mishnah. And therefore, Ma'achilon oso al pi atzmo. And therefore you feed him. Shenamar leiv yodei amoras nafsho. So Mar Baravashi will have a different reading in the Seif of the Mishnah. Previously we had tried to say that two medical experts can trump the patient in a case where the patient says, I need to eat, and they say you don't need to eat. Mar Baravashi says nothing of the sort. The Seif is talking about where he says, I need to eat. And in that situation, no number of medical experts can trump the patient himself. And that's what it means, Zimein Sham Bekiyin, which means that when he says, I need to eat, we don't reckon it all with medical experts. That's what the Mishnah means in the end. Okay, let's go on to the next Mishnah. Misha Achzo Bulmus. Now, Bulmus, and maybe Dr. Libman, you can enlighten us. A person, this is a medical condition which is like an attack. It's a hunger attack, is the way you would describe a bulmus, where a person's eyes start to glaze over. Maybe he goes into maybe a diabetic shock of some kind. It's not clear, but he goes into some kind of attack, and we see that if we don't get food into his mouth, he can be potentially in medical danger. Would it be called that? What is that called? A diabetic shock?
Well, there's so many different things.
Right. So it could, but it's called bulmus in the language of the Mishnah. So anyway, ma'achilon oso afilu devarim timeim ad sheyauru einav. We feed him no matter what. Even if we only have non-kosher food available, we give him whatever we can until his eyes regain themselves. In other words, until his eyes regain their vision. Mishanashchel kelev shota. If a person is bitten by a mad dog, probably a rabid dog, ein machilin oso mechatzer kaved shelo. We do not feed him from the lobe of the liver of the dog. That was considered to be a remedy. By what you do is you kill the rabid dog, you take a piece of its liver, and you give it to the patient to cure him. However, the Tanakama says we don't allow you to do that. Why? Because it's not a proven remedy. And since it's not proven, we can't justify feeding tarfus to you. Reb Masya ben Charash Mater, Reb Masya ben Charash disagrees. He says it's enough of a proven remedy to allow you to feed non-kosher meat to this person. That if a person has some kind of sore throat where we're worried about constriction, we're worried about that this could be potentially cause asphyxiation of some kind, so matilon lo sam besoch piv b'Shabbos. We pour medicine down his throat, even on Shabbos, when normally medicinal cures are not permitted, because nothing stands in the way, even of a safek nefashos, even if there's a doubt of saving, helping a person. Mipnei shehu safek nefashos, the whole safek nefashos doches Shabbos. You override Shabbos all the time, even if it's only safek nefashos, even if it's only a safek. And in the same vein, misha naflolov mapoles. You see a building collapse, and usually this building has occupants. So therefore, safek husham, safek enosham. You're not sure if there's anyone there or not. Safek chai, safek meis. You're not sure even if there is someone in there. Maybe the person's already dead. And safek kusi, safek Yisrael. And you're not sure whether that person is a kuti, in which case you're not supposed to help kutim, who are these Samaritans who are the thorn in the side of the Jewish people, or whether it's a Jew. So there we would not be able to justify saving the Kutite's life. But in any event, you're not sure who it is. Nevertheless, because it's a safek, mefachin alav esagal, you are allowed to violate Shabbos by beginning to remove the rubble. Mitza'uhu chai, if you find the person still alive, then mefachin, then you continue removing the rubble. V'imeis yanichuhu, but if you remove the rubble, and by removing a portion of the rubble you discover that the person is already deceased, you're not allowed to continue removing rubble. You leave him until after Shabbos. The Gemara now says, Tana Rabbanon, Minayin hoyodim shehi'iru einov. How do you know that a guy who's had a bulmus attack, how do you know that he's recovered? In other words, at what point can you stop feeding him the treif of food? So mishiyavchin bein tov l'ra. At such point where he's able to distinguish between good and bad food. And Amar Abaye v'taima. We're talking about flavor. In other words, when a guy's got bulmus, he'll eat anything. Just get the calories into his system, and then he'll be okay. And he doesn't care about taste. His tongue doesn't even work properly. But once he's sort of recovered from the bulmus attack, then if you ask him, if you give him something bitter, you'll say, does this taste bitter? He'll say, yeah. So then you know that he's recovered from his bulmus attack. It's probably be interesting to do a medical study about different kinds of hypoglycemia and other kinds of diabetic shock, and see if these things line up.
So just like his vision was disappeared, so how do we know when it comes back? Because the Gemara said only until his vision comes back. So it's saying for the taste, it means all his senses actually leave. He doesn't have taste either. So as soon as his taste comes back, then you know his visions come back.
Right.
And then
That's right. Tana Rabbana. Misha achzo bulmus. If a person has this bulmus attack, ma'achilin oso hakal. You have to try and minimize the amount of isser that you feed him. In other words, yes, it's permitted to feed him a davar ha'asr, but don't jump to the most usr thing first. In other words, try to find something that's minimally usr before you give him something that's really usr. So, for example, tevel unevela, machilin oso nevela. If you have a choice between tevel, where it's not only a mitzvah lo saseh, but it comes with misa b'dei shamayim, so then, or versus nevela versus a McDonald's hamburger, give him the McDonald's before you give him the tevel, because that's a lesser isser. Tevel u'shvius, if it's between tevel and shmita produce, shvius. Give him shmita produce, because that's only a violation of the mitzvah saseh. And tevel u'truma tanoyi. But let's say the choice is between tevel and truma. Now, as we'll see in just a moment, what we're talking about is where you have untithed produce in front of you, and you have the option of either tithing it in advance and then feeding him everything, both the mu'usr and the truma, or you have the option of not doing anything at all and just giving it to him as tevel. So which one is better? So that's a machlokas tanoim. Detanya, machilin oso tevel ve'in machilin oso truma, but bentema omer truma velo tevel. This is the machlokas, which one is better. Amar Rabba, and Rabba just clarifies this. Heicha de efsher bechulin de kuliyama lo pligi de mesakinin lei umasfinon lei. There's no machlokas. Let's say you have a large amount of produce. So in that situation where you can tithe it properly, put aside the truma, and feed him this large quantity of tithed produce, and not feed him truma, then everyone agrees that that's what you're supposed to do. The kipligi b'delo efsher b'chulin. The machlokus is, what if you only have a small amount of produce, and you anticipate that this bulmus guy is going to need to eat all of the stuff that's present? Is it better to marsover tevel chamur or marsover truma chamura? Which one is better? Is it better to feed him untithed produce, which is tevel, or is it better to feed him truma, which means that you're going to tithe it, give him both the tithed permissible portion and the truma portion, and it's usher for a non-Kohen to eat the truma, especially in a state of tumah. That also is the same level of severity as tevel. But which one is better? So, marsover tevel chamer, avol truma chazia lekohen. So one opinion is to say that tevel is more stringent. Why? Because tevel is permitted to no one. Truma is at least permitted to one class of Jews, and therefore you see that it's not as bad. It's permitted to Kohanim. And therefore, if it's the lesser of two evils would be to tithe first and give him both the Me'usar and the Truma. Umar Savar Truma Chamura Vol Tevel Efshel Lisikune. And the other opinion is no, Truma is worse because once something is Truma, it never is permitted to a non-Kohen. But Tevel can always be rectified in the future. So because of its future rectifiability, it isn't as chamer as truma.
But we wouldn't say that by nevela.
You wouldn't say that by nevela. Nevela is not right. It's not rectifiable. But still, tevel is worse than nevela because the isser in the Torah is worse.
I mean, people don't look at it that way.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
If you're taking it off, is that an extra thing you're doing on the Yanta for Shabbat?
Oh, so we're not talking about. So we're going to talk about Shabbos as well. Okay. So hold on a second. Up until now, we're just talking about a guy on Wednesday who's attacked by bulmus, okay? Now let's talk about so the Gemara now says, Efsher b'chulin pshita. So why was it even necessary for Rabbi to make this point of telling me that if it's possible to tithe it, then of course that's what you're supposed to do. Isn't that obvious? So the Gemara says, no, it's not so obvious. Lo tzricha b'Shabbos. No, because we're talking about, as you had pointed out, we're talking about a case where the guy gets a bulmus attack on Shabbos. Now, the Gemara says, b'Shabbos nami pshita tiltul midrabbananu. The Gemara says, but that also should be fairly obvious. Of course you should tithe. Why? Because it's only an Isser D'Rabbanan to tithe on Shabbos. Here you have a guy, we have a choice between giving him tevel, which is Asr Mid'Oraisa, versus tithing, which is an act Mid'Rabbanan. Now, by the way, it's not so pashut over here, because normally we don't tell one person to do an Aveira in order to help another person avoid doing an Isser D'Oraisa. But that's something that should be sort of analyzed carefully over here. But you're dealing with an issue of pikuach nefesh. So clearly over here the guy has a heter to do an Isser D'Rabbanan versus an Isser D'Oraisa. Of course you should do the Isser D'Rabbanan over the Isser D'Oraisa. So therefore, hacha b'mayaskinan ba'atzitz she'eno nakov D'Rabbanan. So the answer is no, it's not a choice between a D'Oraisa tevel and a tithing D'Rabbanan. It's a choice between tevel D'Rabbanan and tithing D'Rabbanan. And the reason is because we're talking about produce that was grown hydroponically. It was grown out in a pot, in a vessel that is above ground, and therefore it's only subject to tithing and to the laws of tevel Midrabbanan. So therefore you have a choice. I can either give this guy tevel Midrabbanan, or I can tithe Midrabbanan, which is an Isser D'Rabbanan. Which one trumps which? So Mar Savar tevel Chamor, or Mar Savar Truma Chamor. Now we're going to take out that line, which is what the Haggah on the side says. And therefore what Rabbi is basically arguing is that even though you only have a tevel D'Rabbanan, he still feels it's more important to tithe on Shabbos and violate the Isser of tithing on Shabbos than it is to feed a person tevel Midrabbanan. Why? Because since tevel has a parallel on a D'Oraisa level, it's a lesser of two evils to tithe on Shabbos than it is to give a guy tevel, because who knows, if you give him the tevel now, even though it's only an Isser D'Rabbanan, maybe next time he'll eat tevel D'Oraisa. So that's the Rabba's rationale.
Are we still talking about a Yom Kippur? Or
No. We haven't been talking about Yom Kippur since the Mishnah.
This Mishnah is not Yom Kippur.
No. So the Gemara now says, Leima Tanoi, let us suggest, I'm sorry, if I didn't make that clear, I apologize. Leima Tanoi, let us suggest that Rabba's argument is that you should, better that you should tithe than feed the guy tevel midrabbanan is a machlokas tanoi. Detanya, as the Brisa says, Misha nashcho nachash karan lo rofe mimakom lamakom umekaran lo esatar negolas. If a person gets a snake bite, so this is an issue of pikuach nefesh, and this happens on Shabbos. So number one, you can fetch a doctor even from outside the tchum. That's not an issue. You can tear open a chicken, or kill a chicken, because apparently they would take a portion of the chicken guts or flesh, whatever it is, and put it on the snake bite to draw out the venom. The goes is in lo accretion. You can even pull out cress from the ground or leek from the ground. Apparently that was also a remedy for snake bite. U'ma'achilin also, and feed it to him. Ve'ein sarach la'aser, and you don't have to tithe it. That's divrei Rabbi. That's according to Rabbi. And Rabbi Elazar, but Rabbi Shimon Omer lo yochal ad sheyaser, and he says no. Even though you need this as a remedy, first tithe it, even though it's Shabbos, and then you can eat it. So name a Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, he v'lo Rabbi. Let's say that Rabbi holds like Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. He says the lesser of two evils is tithing on Shabbos better than feeding someone tevel midrabbanan. How do we know that this is tevel midrabbanan? Because it's a vegetable. Vegetables are only subject midoraisa. They're not subject to tithing. They're only subject to tithing midrabbanan. So this is a comparable case, right? So therefore, you see that it's a machlokas tanoim. What Rabbi was saying. According to Rebbe, it's better just to give him tevel and not to tithe. So the Gemara says no. Afilu tema Rebbe ad kan lo kama Rebbe Hasan elul inyan meiser yerek derabbanan. Avol b'meiser dagan the tevel deoraisa hu afilu Rebbe moda. He says no. Listen to the following logical distinction. Maybe the only time Rebbe says it's better not to tithe and to give him the vegetable that's untithed is only because you're dealing with a type of produce which is never subject to biblical tithing. But grain which is grown hydroponically, which is only subject to tithing midrabanan, but there is a counterpart of grain which is subject to biblical tithing when it's grown normatively. And therefore, maybe Rebbe would agree, it's better to tithe the hydroponic grain, because if we let you eat tevel grain, even though it's only a tevel midrabanan, you may come next time to eat grain that was grown normatively, and then you'd be in violation of the deoraisa. Whereas by vegetables, since there's never a case of vegetables which is subject to tithing midioraisa, maybe there's more reason for Rebbe to be makel over there. So it's not necessarily a machlokas, that which Rabbi said over here. Tanu Rabbanan, Mishach so bulmus machilano so dvash v'chol minei mesika shahadvash v'chol minei mesika meirin mo'or einav shel adam. This is again an indication that we're dealing with some kind of diabetic shock, because it says that when a person has a bulmus attack, give him something sweet, because that which is sweet will restore a person's illumination to his eyes.
It sounds like it might be the opposite, as though sometimes they're having some kind of low blood sugar because they.
That's hypoglycemia, right?
Hypoglycemia.
Hypoglycemia, right?
No, diabetes.
Diabetic, and they put so much insulin. You know, it's weird.
Yeah.
Insulin reaction.
I once, when I was I was training with Hatzalah, they taught us what to do. There's
right.
The diabetic has like a tube of like glucose or something.
Because they don't know. The thing is, because you don't know whether he's overdosed in insulin or he's in a diabetic coma and his sugar's too high. So give him some. If you give him something sweet and if it's because he's too low, then and he's overdosed on his own insulin, so then you'll save him.
Right.
You won't hurt him because if his sugar's too high, a little bit of sugar's not going to hurt him.
Right.
But bulmos actually it's related to bulimia. Bull in Greek is ox. It's like an ox hunger.
Ah, interesting.
And they don't think that bulimia and bulmos is the same word, but it's not the same
disease.
It can't be.
Yeah. Right. Interesting. Okay. Even though we can't prove this to you, that something sweet helps a bulmus attack, nevertheless we have a pasuk that sort of indicates it in a vague way, because it says Re'una ki oru einai ki ta'amti ma'at devash hazeh. Yonasan says, my eyes have been illuminated by having tasted this honey. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? Umay afal pishen raya ledavar. He says, well, that seems to be a very clear indication. Why do you see that? Why do you tell me that this is not proof? Because the Hasam lav bulmus achazeh. There, Yonasan didn't have bulmus. He just was, a little fatigued maybe. And there, he was saying, I'm a chaya, something sweet. So you don't see necessarily that an actual bulmus attack is alleviated by sweets. Amar Abaye lo shanu elo la'achar achila. Aval kodem achila migra gor. And Abaye says something also very interesting. He says that it's only, bulmus is alleviated by sweets only if you give him something normal that's not sweet to eat first. But if you give him something first sweet, and and he's having a bulmus shock, then actually that could potentially be worse. That could actually make him even fall deeper into his bulmus attack. The Chasiv, as it says, Vayimtzu ish mitzri basadeh, also in Sefer Shmuel, they find an Egyptian man in the field. Vayikchu oso el David, they bring him to King David. Vayitnu lo lechem, vayochal vayishku mayim, they give him bread to eat, they give him water to drink, and only then, after they gave him like normal food, vayitnu lo pelach develu shnei tzimukim vayochal vatashav rucho elav, and only then do they give him some fig cake and the raisins, and he eats it and his spirit is restored. Because he had not eaten that whole time before then for 3 days and 3 nights. So you see that you first give him something like starch to eat, and then you can give him the sweets. If someone has a bulmus attack, you should give him fatty meat of the tail that's cooked in honey. Rav Huna Bereder Rav Yeshua Amar Afsolis Nikiya B'Dvash. He says it's also good to give him fine flour cooked in honey. Rav Papa Amar Afilu Kimchi Desari B'Divshi. It doesn't have to be fine flour. He says it could even be barley flour, which is an inferior flour, but as long as it's cooked in honey, that's fine. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Pamechas Achazani Bulmus Beratzti LeMizracha Shel Te'ena B'Kiyamti Ba'atzmi HaChachma Techayeh Be'aleha. He says, once I was overcome by bulmus shock. I ran over to the eastern side of the tree, of a fig tree, and I ate because the eastern side of a fig tree has the sweetest fruits. Why is that? Who can tell me why? Because of the sun. When the sun is at its strongest point, as it's coming up into the midday, it's stronger as it's coming up, so it sweetens the fruit more. And he says, and based on my knowledge of horticulture and the effects of light on produce, I was able to fulfill the pasuk that wisdom will sustain those who possess it. Detani Rav Yosef Arotza Litom Tam Te'ena Yifna Lemizracha. As Rav Yosef had taught that if a person wants to have a superior flavor of fig, he should go to the eastern side of the tree. Shenemar Umimeged Tevuo Shamesh. As it says in the pasuk, the finest quality comes from the grain of the sun, which means where the sun is coming up. Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbi Yossi Havu Ka'azli Bu'urcha. Now we're going to learn a couple of road trip stories. Like Bing Crosby and Bob Hope, but Lahavdil Elef Abdullah, this is Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. Okay? So they're traveling on the road. They're on their road trip.
Did they sing?
I don't know. I know there's no musical track on the Gemara. Anyway, they were going on the road, and Ach Ze Bulmus LeRebbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda gets overtaken by bulmus as they're traveling. So Kafche Leroa Achli Lerifta. He runs over to a shepherd in the middle of the field, grabs his bread and eats it, because he says, I'm sorry, man, I gotta eat. So Amalei Rabbi Yossi Kafachta Saroa. So Rabbi Yossi says, what are you doing? You're stealing from the shepherd. So Rabbi Yossi was critical of him, but Rabbi Yehuda was like, what am I supposed to do? I got bulmus. Kimatu lamasa achze bulmus l'Rabbi Yossi. Ahadruhu bal givitzoi. When they got to town, then Rabbi Yossi was overtaken by a bulmus attack, and when the people of the town saw that, everyone brought out food from their cupboards on plates to feed him. And apparently, so Rabbi Yehuda is now time to be critical. Ani kafachti yisaroa v'ata kafachti sa'ir kula. I stole from one poor shepherd, but you stole from the entire village, because everyone came out and brought out all their food for you. V'su Reb Meir v'Reb Yehuda v'Reb Yossi havakazli borcha. Now we have three great rabbis on the road, on a road trip. Rabbi Meir havadayik bishma, Reb Yehuda v'Reb Yossi lavodayiki bishma. Now Reb Meir was very careful about the name of his host. But Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi were not careful. When we say the name of the host, what it means is Rabbi Meir would ask the guy his name, and if the name implied something negative, he'd be very cautious and would protect himself from any harm that the host might try to present. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda thought that was a bubba maisa. They didn't worry about that at all. So kimati lehahu duchta bo'u ushpisa yavulahu. So they came to a certain place, they're looking for lodging, and a guy says, come please stay with me. Amru lo mashmecha. They said to him, what's your name? Amru lahu Kidor. So Kidor, that's my name. So Rabbi Meir says to himself, without telling Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmamina Adam Rashu. He must be a bad guy. Shenemar Kidor Tapu Chosema. As it says in Hazinu, this is a generation that is upside down, meaning an evil generation. So Rabbi Yehuda of Rabbi Yossi Ashlima lo Kisai. Rabbi Meir lo Ashlim le Kisai. So Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, who weren't worried about bad names, the guy said, look, it's Shabbos. It's almost Shabbos is coming. You can't hold on to your money. Give me your money. I'll put it in a safe hiding place. I'll watch over it. Reb Meir says, no, thank you, sir. I'll take care of my money myself. So Azal Osve Bekivrei de Avuha. So Reb Meir, what he did is he buried it there was a cemetery in the backyard of this guy's father, and he put the money in where this father was buried. So Aschazi le Bechelmei. So the innkeeper's father comes to him in a dream that night, Friday night, and says, would someone please take the bag of money off of my head? And so So the next day, the innkeeper says to them, I had this weird dream that my father came to me and told me to pull off a bag of money off of my head. So Amri Lei Chalma Deveshim Shalespuhu Mishasha. Lespuhu Mamasha. They said to him, don't worry about it. A dream that you have Friday night, after all the chicken soup and the flunkin and all that stuff, it's probably just a crazy dream. Don't worry about it. So, and they did that because Reb Meir knew that that's where the money taka was. So Azal Reb Meir v'natre kula YOMA v'aisi and lamachar. So Reb Meir stayed by the father's grave the entire Shabbos to watch over it, to make sure the innkeeper wouldn't come and try to dig it up. And he retrieved his money after Shabbos. So Lamachar Amrulo Havlan Kisam. But what about Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda? They come after Shabbos and they say to the innkeeper, "Good sir, please give us our money." So Amar Lahu Lo Hayu Dvar Me'olam. He said, "What money? What are you talking about?" So Amar Lahu Reb Meir Amaylo Daikisu Bishma. So Reb Meir chides them and he says, why didn't you guys look at his name? His name is Kedor. Didn't you know that he's a bad guy? So Amrulei Amaylo Amar Tlanmar. Why didn't you tell us? If you were cautious, you should have told us to be cautious too. So Amar Lahu Amar Da Amri Ana Chashashach Zuke Mi Amri. So Reb Meir said, I only thought that if a guy has a name that portends bad, you should worry, you should be a little bit concerned. I didn't think that it meant that there's a chazaka that he's bad, that for sure that he's bad, and that's why I didn't raise any objections. Anyway, mashchu va'elu l'chanusa. So, what did Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda do? They said, we got to get our money back. So they said, come on, let's take you out for a drink. They take him out to the pub, and they give him wine to drink. Chazu talfachi ashafamai. And they notice as he's drinking, and he's schmoozing, and he's singing, so they notice that he's got some lentils on the side, dried lentils from dinner on the side of his mouth. So azlu v'yavu simla devisu v'shaklu likisayu va'aisu. So they leave the guy in the tavern. They come back to the innkeeper's wife and they say, your husband told us to tell you to give us our money bags, and he said that the simon to know that he sent us is that you had lentils for dinner tonight. So she said, oh, that's a good simon. So she gave him the bags. Azal ihu v'katle li'itse. And when he sobered up and he came home and he discovered that his wife gave him the money, he killed his wife. And hainu detanya mayim rishonim he'echilu basar chazir mayim achronim hargu es hanefesh. And that's why there's a saying that a failure to wash mayim rishonim caused the person to eat chazer, and a failure to wash mayim achronim caused a woman to get killed. Now, what is the first part? We know what the last part is this story. The guy, if he had washed mayim achronim after dinner, he would have wiped the food off of his mouth with the water that was on his fingers, and they never would have known that he had lentils for dinner. What's the first part? That mayim rishonim. So Rashi says there was once an inn where the innkeeper, who was Jewish, had both Jewish guests and non-Jewish guests. To the Jewish guests he fed kosher food, to the non-Jewish guests he fed tarfus. And how would he know which was which? If you washed your hands before the meal, you knew that you were Jewish. So a Yid came in, for whatever reason, he didn't wash. So the innkeeper assumed that he was a goy, so he gave him chazer. And that's the story. The story is that be careful, make sure you wash, so that the innkeeper will give you kosher food. I don't think the COR would ever go for this kind of thing. But anyway, ulabasov havudaiki bishma. So anyway, from that point onwards, they were always careful with names, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda. Kimatu le'ahu beisa dishmei bala lo aidu legabe. Later on, continue the story about their road trip. This is now the sequel to the movie, the next in the series. So they come to another innkeeper. His name is Bala. They said, you know what? We're not going to you because Amri Shmami no Rashu. You must be a bad guy. Dichsiv va'omar lebala ne'ofim, as the pasuk says, that they said to a person who was worn out from all this adulterous behavior. So this must mean that your name is Bala. It implies promiscuity, and therefore we're not going to have anything to do with you. Vayter, we have to go Vayter because tomorrow's Rosh Chodesh. Misha nashcho kelev shota v'chuli. If a person's bitten by a mad dog, right? So we said, there's a machlokas whether you can give the liver of the dog. Tana Rabbanan Chamisha Dvarim Nemru Bekelev Shota. There are 5 statements made about a mad dog, about how you can tell what he is. So Piv Pasuach, his mouth is open. Viriro Notif, his saliva drips, could be these froths at the mouth. Ba'oznav Suruchos, his ears are swollen and bent over. Uzanav Amunach al Yarchosav, and his tail is between his legs. Umahalech B'tzidei Durachim, and he walks by the side of the road. V'yesh Omrim Af Noveach Ben Kol Nishma. Some say also another symptom is that he barks, but you can't hear what's coming out of his mouth. Mimai Havi, how does a dog become mad like this? Rav Amar Nashim Kashfanios Misachakos Bo, Ushmul Amar Ruach Ra Shora Elav. It's machlokas. Rav says it's because of witchcraft. Witches put a hex on the dog. And Shmuel says it's because of shadim. So, the demonic forces. And the Gemara asks, "My Beinai, what difference does it make how he became rabid?" So the Gemara says, "Ika Beinai lemiktale bedavar hanizra." The nafkamina is going to be when you want to kill the dog. How are you supposed to kill him? According to Rab, just go over to the dog and give him a zetz with a hammer. According to Shmuel, because there are shadim surrounding the dog, you can't get too close to the dog, so you have to kill it with an arrow, a bow and arrows, because you can't kill it by coming close to it. Tanya Kavase de Shmuel, Kishaharginoso, Ein Harginoso, Ela Bedavar Hanizrak. The Brisa says, like Shmuel, that when you kill a rabid dog, you should shoot it from afar so that you don't get too close to it. Now, the Chayif Be Mistakein Denochis Leimayas. If a rabid dog brushes against you, it presents you with a sakana to your life. If he bites you, then you're a dead man. So the Chayif Be Mistakein Maitakante. If he brushes against you, you're in sakana. What are you supposed to do to help alleviate the sakana? So Nishlach Mani Vinir Hayit. What you should do is throw your clothes off and just run. In other words, disrobe and run. And the reason is because whatever disease the dog has brushed up against you on your clothes, you'll get rid of your clothes and then you'll hopefully be okay. Rav Huna bereid Rav Yeshua chaf bechad minayu b'shuka, and this happened to Rav Huna bereid Rav Yeshua. A mad dog brushed up against him in the marketplace. Shalchinu l'mali v'roi. He threw off his clothes and he just started running. Amar kiyamti ba'atzmi achachma techaye be'aleha. And again he said, you know what? I fulfilled within me the pasuk that wisdom will sustain those who possess it. Denachis leimayis maitakante. So if the rabid dog bites you, you're going to die. So is there anything that you can do? So Amar Abaye neise mashcha da'apa dichra. Take the hide of a male. They translate it in the art school as a polecat, some kind of undomesticated feline animal. V'nichtov aleha ana planya bar palnisa. I also saw that some translated as a hyena, so I'm not sure. What you should do is write on this hide, I, so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, my mother, amashcha da'apa dichra kasivna Allah. I am now writing my name on you, this hide of this animal. Kanti kanti kliros, va'amri la kandi kanti koloros. These are incantational words that don't seem to have any real meaning. Ka ka Hashem tzivakos, amen amen sela. That's what you're supposed to write on the hide. Then, unishalchinu lemane, thrust off your clothes, v'likverinu beikvari, bury them in a cemetery, atresa yarcheshasa, for 12 months. V'nafkinu v'naklinu b'tanura, after 12 months, dig them up, burn them in an oven, v'navderinu likitame, aparshas drachim, scatter the ashes of the clothes at a crossroads. V'hanach tresa yarcheshasa, and during that 12-month period, assuming that you survive the rabies bite, kishasi milo lishti ela begufta denachsha, only drink water. Do not drink water. Lo lishti ela begufta denachsha. It sounds like the Bryce is saying you should only drink water out of a copper container,
copper straw,
or copper. Well, could be a copper. Okay, dilma chazu bavua deshida v'listakin. Lest you see the shadow of the shade, or you see the reflection of the shade in the water, which could, and therefore that by drinking, I guess, through the straw, you'll avoid seeing the reflection in the water, and therefore you won't come to sakana. Because if you've been bitten by a dog who's been attacked by shadim, by you looking at the reflection of the shade, that could put you in real mortal danger. Kihada Abba Bar Marta, hu Abba Bar Minyuni, Avdala Ime Guvda de Dahava. And we have an example of this, that the Abba Bar Marta's mother made him a gold straw to prevent him from ever looking at the reflection in the water from which he was drinking, so that he would avoid being put into a makam sakana. And we'll hold it here for today.